What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Grid Live Encore. Happy Easter Monday to all of you. Brandon Crossland joining me once again. Brandon, how's it going?
All good, Ben, and good to be on Grid Live Encore. And yes, had Easter yesterday. Great time with family, and glad to be here with you to talk about Richmond and everything else going on as the motorsports world is just about to explode here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, lots of stuff going on. The grid ranking coming out very shortly, so make sure you all stay tuned to that. We had a cup race on Sunday night this week, so that means the coverage got bumped over to our show here on Encore, so we'll get into that here in just a moment, and then, of course, cover the Xfinity Series as we always do on this show. But first, as always, we want to give a special shout-out to our Patreon supporters, Colin, Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew. Thank you all so much for your support over the last several years here. It's meant the world to us here at Grid Network. After 4 years, we finally hit the milestone of 1,000 subscribers. So thank each and every one of you who has subscribed to our YouTube channel. It means the world to us, and we are looking forward to the next 1,000 already, and appreciate all of your support. If you like what you see tonight, you can make a donation through YouTube Super Chats, or you can visit the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description box below if you'd rather make a one-time donation, or you can also join the 6 individuals I just listed off at the start of the show and join our Patreon if you want to support us as well. But now that we have 1,000 subscribers, we have monetization enabled. Just the views on YouTube alone are enough to help us continue to fund what we do here at Grid Network and get us to more races, as we had Jackson at the Thermal Club a couple of weeks ago, and looking forward to Portland here in a couple of months for NASCAR Xfinity as well. So thank you all so much, and we hope you enjoyed the show tonight. Let's get into the NASCAR Cup Series recap. Denny Hamlin was the one who took the win, the first Cup Series race to enter overtime this season. Looked like Martin Truex Jr. was going to be set free, but ended up losing his cool a little bit there in that last sequence of events. Hamlin, however, there's been a little bit of controversy. Did he jump the start? Was he going before the restart zone? What was the legality of that? Ultimately, NASCAR decided not to review the restart. Truex, as we mentioned, thought he had the win until Bubba Wallace and Kyle Larson came together. Larson ended up recovering very nicely. See him up there in third. He was so far ahead after such a long green flag run, but he didn't lose that much track time. Bubba Wallace, meanwhile, same song and dance for 2311 pit crew. They let him down once again. He fell back, was only able to recover back up to P13. But Brandon, let's start with Gibbs. Let's start with Martin Truex Jr. Obviously, he was frustrated. His pit crew lost the lead to Denny Hamlin, and then Hamlin arguably jumped the restart zone just a little bit. Was his frustration, and specifically how he raced Larson and bumped Hamlin after the race, his own teammate, was that warranted given what happened to him in the closing laps?
Well, I guess it was called for. I mean, look, he had the whole race won. It was him and Larson leading all night long, and then you get down to it, and you get in one of the most unlikely places for us to finally snap this no overtime finish streak in the Cup Series at Richmond Raceway, where usually like we started talking about, Ben, it usually is some spacing out, and someone will go on to win it very much uncontested because they've got a good gap and they can cruise their way to the finish. But just had that altercation there with Bubba and Kyle, and it was all chaos from there. And the sort of the jump start from Denny. Sure, Truex has every right to be frustrated there, but I think what was more surprising is just how much he did retaliate. We didn't really expect this much from Martin Truex Jr., and I don't think a lot of the other guys in the garage expected it either out of a longtime veteran to have such a reaction. But he definitely did let his feelings known. I'm glad NASCAR didn't go back and look at the restart as sketchy as it did look. I think it was good to leave it alone. But yeah, it was pretty wild there to see Martin Truex get a little unnerved there.
You know, I've never been a big fan of the restart zone, just generally speaking. I feel like the leader should be the control car and the leader should decide when to go. Obviously, Denny Hamlin, I think, was a little bit early on the gas, but then to me, when I watched the replay, it looked like Hamlin gained an advantage, and then Truex caught up to him, and they stayed pretty much where they were until they got into turn one. So I don't know if Denny realized that he jumped the start and then, backed off for just a half second and then started going again, or what happened. I haven't seen telemetry. I don't know if that's been made public yet. He certainly had some fun with it being April Fool's Day and claimed to admit to jump the start, and because of that, he was going to do the right thing and wish everybody a happy April Fool's. So go check out that tweet or post on X, I guess I should say, if you haven't seen it already. But I don't know if it necessarily made much of a difference in who won the race. I think the big difference was made on pit road, and I think it's a shame that we've spent the entire day talking about the restart rather than the great job that the number 11 team did in the pits to get Denny Hamlin in that position in the first place. You hate it for Martin Truex Jr., obviously, because he, like we said, had the race pretty much won, and then something out of his control bunches the field back up, and it creates an overtime restart. So you certainly feel for him. I don't know if it necessarily the attitude after the race. I think, we've said this about Truex before in the past, right? He talks like Dale Earnhardt, but he races like Mark Martin. Like, you can say everything you want when you get out of the car and talk about how uncalled for things are and how you're tired of being raced that way. But, as much as I am not a fan of intentional wrecks at all or payback or anything like that, I would feel a little bit less annoyed by some of his comments sometimes if he actually stood behind his word and raced a little bit harder than he does. But, I think that's just who Martin Truex Jr. is at this point. That's who we've come to know him as throughout his entire career. And I can't say I'm too surprised by what we saw at the end of the race yesterday, last night there.
Yeah, absolutely. Denny Hamlin's team crushed it there in the pits, getting him 2 spots. That really sealed the deal in my mind. Like, okay, yeah, he's legitimately got a shot here to win. And come on, the Toyota Owners 400. We knew one of the Toyotas was probably going to have a good. Not saying that has anything to do with it, but Toyota decides to sponsor that race for a reason. They know that among Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr., they've got a really good shot of getting a checkered flag, and they got it there with Hamlin. But yeah, I was also kind of amused of how Larson, when they told Larson about Truex's how upset he was and everything, Larson was like, "Yeah, I don't hold it against him. Like I know who he is. Like he's like, yeah, it's all cool. Like basically they were trying to start beef, and Larson's like, no, I mean I know he's probably upset, and I know he's like, I know Martin, once he sees this in the replays, he's gonna kind of calm down a little bit."
Yeah, and credit to Bubba Wallace as well, because there was a video that Noah Lewis posted that I think NBC ended up reposting, and maybe Fox as well. He went straight up to Kyle Larson after the race and apologized, and the two of them were very professional in how they handled that ordeal, which when you think back to Vegas a couple of years ago, I think was certainly a sign of growth and maturity on Bubba Wallace's part for sure. And again, I'm sure somebody out there is going to blow it out of proportion just because anytime those two get together, unfortunately, it's going to be a story one way or another. But I think given that the contact happened, the end result, what we saw with that conversation in the pits probably was handled the best possible way it could be. So credit to both of them there. And like Bubba said, karma kind of came back to bite him in the pits, and Kyle Larson, meanwhile, ended up ahead of where he was before the contact even happened. So I guess you could say it all worked out in the end. Now let's stick with sorry, Brandon, you want to follow up on that?
No, I'm good. I was just going to say Bubba and Larson at Las Vegas, that was a completely different place, different time. I think they both grown a lot there since
we don't need to revisit that in the slightest. I completely agree with you. Let's follow up with Truex here, talk about him a little bit more. Obviously, a good start to the season, but the frustration certainly showed last night. Do you think he's under pressure at all? We've seemed to go through these rumors every year that he might be retiring. Toyota obviously has a lot of young talent in their development pipeline, and we saw what happened with Matt Kenseth in the 20 car in 2017. Do you think that the pressure might be getting Martin Truex Jr. a little bit right now?
I really think so. And if you take a look at who won the Xfinity race on Saturday in the 81 of Chandler Smith, there's plenty in the Joe Gibbs camp that are going to need a ride here very soon if they keep showing their prowess. And one of those spots I think we all can kind of look at and circle is the 19 car. And Martin Truex Jr., we keep thinking like, okay, is this the year? Okay, is this the year? And it keeps going, no, we're going to keep on going. And eventually that's going to break. I don't know what it's going to take for Martin Truex to say, you know what, this is it. This will be my final time. And again, I didn't come in prepared knowing where his contract is right now. I don't know if it's a one more year extension or two or whatever they extended it to. But that's definitely got to be on your mind. That was already on my mind before you made a question today. And then when I saw it, I was like, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking about. Um, and you bring up Matt Kenseth with the 20. I mean, from that same stable a few years ago. In retrospect, just being pushed out of your ride. Maybe Martin doesn't want to go, and maybe not coach, but someone else at JGR might be thinking, look, coach, we've got to get these guys fueled in, or we've got to get these drivers pushed up, and one of these lesser denominators has to move. But Martin Truex Jr., he hasn't had a bad year so far. I think either from he hasn't finished outside the top 10. You said he has 5 consecutive top 10 finishes. His worst was 15th, right? He hasn't had a bad year so far. So this story is far from over. We have to get through this year first to see where that lies. But definitely some pressure, because he could have had himself locked in, and now he doesn't. That's the final story, and it comes off something that wasn't his issue and became his issue, and just having it all unravel before him. That's really where it all just, it got in his head, and had to let some of his frustration out. I get that, but we can't help but think there's some pressure there.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to pull up the results here. So 2 top 5s, 5 top 10s, all of those consecutive, and then Daytona 500 15th. That was his worst result of the year. So, yeah, like you said, hardly a bad year. But again, we'll pull the Xfinity results back up here real quick, and again, we'll get into that race a little bit later on here in the show. But look at the top 4 guys. I mean, you've got a Gibbs car in first, you got a Gibbs car in second. I'm sure Almirola is probably not a contender for a Gibbs Cup seat at this point in his career, but still a great run for him. Taylor Gray, career day in Xfinity in third, and then Toyota Gibbs related car with Sam Hunt Racing, Corey Heim. Obviously we talk about all that he's done in the Truck Series. He's got to be high on the Toyota prospect list. So, that 3 of those 4, I think for sure, you have to look at maybe not Cup ready next year for all of them, but in the future. We talk about how Toyota is really good at developing young talent, but not as good at holding on to it. I would think they would certainly hate to lose all 3 of these young drivers and young talents. And obviously, we have 2311 now. We have Legacy MC. There could be some opportunities for them in either of those teams with the factory support that Toyota is giving them. But when you think of Toyota in the Cup Series, you still think of Gibbs first, and Martin Truex Jr. is not getting any younger. So I'm sure that, he knows he's much closer to the end than the beginning. And I agree. I think sometimes, that it's hard not to let that pressure get to you, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll keep an eye on that. An interesting manufacturer conversation to be had there. I'm sure all the executives at Toyota are looking at all the pieces of the puzzle that need to go together before next season, but obviously still very early on, a lot of racing to be run still in 2024. Denny Hamlin, obviously, picking up the victory, second repeat winner of the year now, along with William Byron. Chevrolet leads Toyota with 4 wins to 3 on the Cup side of things. Now, on the pre-race show this week, Isha asked Jackson and Joe if Ford needed a win at this point of the year, if it was time to hit the panic button, if they couldn't pick one up this weekend. You see Joey Logano came close. He finished second, the highest finishing Ford car. Brad Keselowski up there with RFK. Josh Berry had a good night, just missed out on a top 10. We'll get to him in just a moment. But Brandon, first looking at Ford overall, do you think that it's time for them to start being a little bit concerned about their race performance and pace compared to where they are in comparison with Chevy and Toyota?
Yes. I mean, their win is coming this year. I mean, without a I say without a doubt, but your results may vary. I think Josh Berry had a pretty good outing, showing that he was the class of Stewart-Haas Racing with the short tracks. We'll get to that later, but the Fords are still definitely number 3. I mean, Chevy not changing their body style at all from last year, which I found surprising, but really with the state that the Camaro's in right now, they don't really have much place to go. So I get why they did that. And then Ford with their dark horse, brand new thing, they're figuring it out, but that's not much of an excuse because Toyota's got the new body too. And that car still hasn't hit showrooms yet. It's the pace car for every weekend, but that body style is slightly different. They're getting wins, and they just got the latest one here. So here Ford is on the cusp of a victory. Who is it going to come from? I don't know. I would say Stuart Haas is probably going to be where you get that first before RFK. Although whenever, like we said last year, whenever Brad Kessel, see, look, there they are, 8th and 9th. Whenever Brad is good, Chris is good, and they usually are kind of like Formula One style, just right next to each other on the grid wherever they're at. They seem to have similar strategy styles, and they tend to hug together. But yeah, they're definitely in a hole here. Ford is.
Hard to believe it's been almost 3 years since Brad Keselowski won a Cup Series race, but like you said, Brandon, the speed is there at RFK much more so than it was before he came on board with that team. He has certainly revitalized that program, and Chris Buescher as well. Multiple race wins now in that 17 car. Like you said, I don't think this is a Toyota 2007 sort of situation where they go winless the entire year.
They're not brand new. No.
Yeah, and you've got Penske, you've got RFK, you've got Stuart Haas, you've got front row. I mean, Michael McDowell looks, as strong as he's ever been now as well, and Todd Gilliland's even had some decent runs to start the year. So
strong car.
Yeah, I wouldn't just say a win. Wins are coming for Ford. It's a matter of time. It's just going to be, will they be as frequent as they are for Chevy and Toyota? And 7 races into the year now, the answer is certainly not at the moment.
For right now, at least, it feels like they're going to end the year still as number 3, because your top guy, Joey Logano, he's just now getting in the groove of things. So that feels like a late bloomer to me. I feel like it's going to be late summer or fall before we have a verdict on that.
Yeah, well, and also in the next gen era, Team Penske's undefeated when it comes to the championship. So, they still have that going for them as well. So there's plenty of time for Ford to be, Well, I say that there's only been two
championships
runs.
Yeah.
We'll say, but again, plenty of talent in the Ford camp, plenty of strong teams in the Ford camp. So even if they are a little bit behind the other 2 manufacturers, I think it's inevitable that at some point the right set of circumstances is going to come their way, and they could break through. And of course, anybody can win, a super speedway race if they can just have enough speed to hang them in draft and play their cards right at the end. So, you got a really great super speedway racer, particularly at Talladega with Brad Keselowski, and Joey Logano's won plenty of those as well. So, there's going to be plenty of opportunities, I think, for those guys to break through. And like I said, probably only a matter of time. Let's look at one of those drivers specifically. Josh Berry, had a really strong night, running up in the top 10 before overtime. Got kind of shuffled back there at the end, just missed out on the top 10 in 11th. But he's had some strong races on the short tracks in Bristol and Richmond. I believe actually finished runner-up here last year when he was subbing for Chase Elliott in a 9 car. So he had
already been there.
Taking a liking to this track, obviously. And, makes sense with his short track roots that he would like this kind of racing and run well here. Obviously it's a transition year for SHR. Kevin Harvick going from the 4 car up to the Fox booth. They don't have that veteran presence anymore at the team with a Cup champion or anything like that. But do you see some new hope on the horizon for Stuart Haas with a run like this for Josh Berry? Can they start contending for wins in the not too distant future?
For the short tracks, for what few short tracks there are, it's all kind of sparsed out throughout the schedule, but they definitely got some hope there with the Hendersonville guy, Josh Berry. He showed some great pace, and it wasn't just a little flare either. He was able to keep it much longer than I actually thought he'd be able to stay up there. And it would be things like pit cycles that would move him back deeper into the grid, but he was able to work his way back up. And same as Bubba Pollard on Saturday for Xfinity, and we'll get to that later in the show as well. But they've got a good horse in the stable there with Josh Berry, at least when they go to the short tracks, and we'll see how that expands as well as we go next Sunday to Martinsville. It's going to be another important litmus test for whatever this short track package is now.
Yeah, well, that's a perfect segue. Let's talk about the package generally speaking a little bit, talk about the race generally speaking as well. A very interesting start to it. The wet weather conditions to begin the race, certainly provided an interesting variable. I think it was pretty positively received, and we'll get into the format of all that here in just a moment. But right now, let's talk about the package, in general. Obviously, the short tracks have kind of been seen as a weakness along with the road courses for the next gen car. Looked like stage 3 was going to be caution free until the last possible moment there coming to 2 to go when Kyle Larson got loose and then slid up the track. Bubba Wallace, and I think inadvertently ended up getting into him. And like we mentioned, no harm, no foul there. I think with those two, they talked it out and everything's good. But it did lead to the overtime restart, which, I know a lot of fans are excited when, we get to overtime, we have those late race moments of uncertainty. But it looked like we weren't going to get that, and it was just going to be a caution-free third stage, which, as we were talking about last week with the stage cautions being back on the road courses, I think long green flag runs, as much as, I think you and I appreciate them, Brandon, with the strategy aspect of all that. Fans, I think, with shorter attention spans, like to see a little bit more action and more opportunity for things to go slightly wrong and for drivers to spin out and lead to more restarts and more action on those restarts. So when you look at this package, and you look at this race as a whole, do you think we've made improvements, or do you think we still need some work, and maybe we'll get a better answer after we go to Martinsville next week?
I'll give NASCAR credit. There's absolutely been improvements since 2022. I don't want to go back to the 2022 short track package. That was just figuring out the next gen car. It was very just can send it right through recording. You think about Martinsville 2 years ago and how it just looked like they could just effortlessly go through the hairpins, and there wasn't much to it. It was just kind of, yep, there they go. All right, it's done. Here's your winner. What a good short track package needs, IMO, in my opinion, would be great tire fall off. You got to have it where you can have, I'm not an engineer, but you need to have some good tire fall off so you can, put some tire management into play, and which I know they're doing that, and it does work. And you've got to have it where drivers complain less about the dirty air. They've got to be able to pass, but not because they're catching a break on a guy, but because they're conserving their tires better than the ones in front of them. That's what, in my opinion, that's what makes good short track racing. And also, I enjoyed the time we had with the not the rain tires, but the wet weather tires. That's so hard to remember, but I'll get there. It was fun to start on that, and I kind of like how that was working for the time. For what on TV didn't seem like a really wet racetrack. I guess it was a lot more damp in person. I guess you had to be there, and also the whole non-competitive pit stop stuff going on the pit road until they were able to get that safely dry. But I wonder what you think about the short track package, Ben. This is something I was waiting to hear your thoughts about.
You're right. It's better than it was. I remember that spring Martinsville race in 22, and that's it. It was kind of shocking, actually, how much they appeared to miss the mark when they first started with that. But hey, the racing on the intermediates, I think, has been fantastic. It's just unfortunate that we spent the entire Gen 6 era, kicking and screaming for more road courses and short tracks, and we got some of those, and then we built a car that was tailor-made for improving the racing on the 1.5 miles, and in the process of that, we hurt the product on the short tracks and road courses, and now it's kind of a reversal. Now we're asking for more intermediates. The intermediates that used to have 2 dates, only have one now. We're asking for those second dates to come back. But obviously, Bristol, Martinsville, and Richmond have been on the schedule forever. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. So obviously we're still going to have some short tracks no matter what. And who knows where the Fairgrounds project is going to go. North Wilkesboro's back hosting the All-Star race. So it's certainly very important that we find a package that works and puts on a good show. I think we're getting there, but there is certainly still some room for improvement. But again, kind of difficult to judge this race in its entirety, given the massive new variable that we had at the start of the race with the wet weather. So, certainly a very interesting dynamic there. All right, let's catch up on the chat here before we move on to our final question here in the Cup segment. Joe Samniego, great point here. And I think, again, something that's been lost in the whole jumping the restart controversy with Denny Hamlin, unfortunately, was that fast pit stop for Denny Hamlin in 9.2. Just a bit faster makes the difference, absolutely. And talking about tires here, held up really well for 30 laps of wet weather conditions. Well, let's talk about that. Something new. We've been testing these tires for a couple of years now. We finally got a chance to actually use them. As you mentioned, Brandon, not rain tires, wet weather tires. The purpose isn't to be able to race in the rain on the short ovals, at least not yet. We'll see if the technology gets there one day. But as of right now, we have the ability to shorten the delay process in terms of, the track not being entirely completely dry, but still damp enough with the rain not coming down that we can put wet weather tires on these cars and they can go out there and race. So something new for the Cup Series. I think we saw it in trucks at Martinsville last year and got to test that out a little bit. But first time for the Cup cars, and then with that, a competition caution after 30 laps. And then NASCAR made the executive decision that the track had gone from wet to dry and the teams would be forced to put on slicks. They couldn't choose where the crossover point would be like we see in Formula One, and that goes to the no competitive pit stops point like you were bringing up, Brandon. So what were your thoughts on the procedure here with this wet weather start, and should NASCAR treat it like a road course or like a Formula One race where they put it in the hands of the teams, or were you okay with them making the decision since this was the first time and a new experience for everybody?
I think while it's still early, it's good that NASCAR sets it where they all have to use it. And listen, you can make fun of it all you want, and you can, purists can scoff at anything rain and tire and wet weather and NASCAR put together. All I know is cars were on track when they normally wouldn't be, and we got racing going when it normally wouldn't have happened. This is near like light inventing the light bulb level for NASCAR to be able to do this. I applaud them for doing the testing they had to do with Goodyear, getting this going to where we can go to a place like Richmond, not the high banks of Bristol like we almost got. Thank goodness St. Patrick's Day weekend wasn't wet on Sunday, but going to Richmond, being able to be on track, and had a really good product there, like Joe said. For they held up for 30 laps, and they dried out pit road, so we would be able to have competitive pit stops. But even if we weren't going to be able to have competitive pit stops, I'm still glad that we were able to just get cars out on the track. And also, when they were on the wet weather tires, there was a lot closer racing, at Richmond, which is kind of uncharacteristic of the place. And I don't know if that's more because of the grip of the tire, or just the cautiousness of the drivers, or maybe a little bit of both. But I was really surprised that we didn't just have some sort of cluster out into turn 3, thinking they're finally confident on it, and then just we get like a big one at Richmond somehow, just because there's a wet spot that they didn't realize, or everyone decided to not go offline. There's not much place to go offline at Richmond. It's pretty small, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, well, certainly an interesting LastCar.info article this week, because to that point, Brandon, the last place finisher, Corey LaJoie, running at the finish only, I think, 3 laps down at the end of it. I mean, for a Richmond race, certainly, very, very low attrition. Yeah, 404 laps, just double checking here, to Denny Hamlin's 407, and all 36 cars running at the finish. So a very clean race. And certainly, you wouldn't be surprised if we saw the opposite of that, given that, these guys have never done this before. But, they say these are the best stock car drivers in the world. And I think for once we actually saw proof of that. Sometimes, we question that a little bit when we see how many overtime restarts we get at tracks like Daytona and Talladega. But credit to the Cup guys. They certainly adapted very, very well, and I think put on a great show. And, I think it is very encouraging to see that, given that this was a new product for everybody. And now I think it gives NASCAR more confidence that we can, be confident in trying this out again when the opportunity comes up at some of the shorter ovals where they've tested these tires.
Also, Ben, I wanted to touch on this before we miss it. We were talking about something Jayski put out before the broadcast. He said this is the only the second time since 2004. Oh, we got an overtime finish for this race, but before Richmond, this is only the second. It was only the second time since 2004, when the overtime rule was instituted in the middle of that season, that there has not been an overtime finish in the first 6 Cup races of the year. And even going back to last season, he says the last 9 Cup races had not had an overtime finish. And I just can't say how surprised I am enough that the overtime finish came at a place like Richmond, of all places. That's just funny how that works.
I'm certainly not going to complain. I share your surprised reaction there to that stat. I think it's probably because you and I normally cover Xfinity trucks and ARCA, where we get. I mean,
we're always talking overtime finishes.
We usually get one of those every week. With one of those series.
That's how the Truck Series operates, is with overtime finishes.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the PTSD starting to kick in from Phoenix last year. I mean, we had more overtime finishes in that one race than we might see in the Cup Series the entire year at this rate that we're going here. But
man, no, in all seriousness, I wanted them to quit. I just wanted them to quit.
Even the flagman wanted them to quit that night, I think. But certainly, yeah. I mean, but you think about that, because I always it amazes me, how fast time has flown by, because I think to myself, 2004 doesn't. I remember 2004. I'm old enough to remember that. It doesn't seem like it was that long ago. That was 20 years ago. So This is only the second time in 20 years that we've reached this point of the season with getting our first overtime finish here at this point in the year.
20 years ago is when Fight to the Top mode was put into NASCAR 2005 Chase for the Cup. You're welcome. Feel the gray hairs yet? Do you feel them?
Is that the last great NASCAR game?
It was my first one on the PS2 was 2005.
Yeah,
it was my favorite, more than 2004 by far. Just because of nostalgia, really.
Yeah, it's a shame it didn't have Pocono. If it had Pocono, I think it would clear 04 by a mile. But
it had Nazareth. It had the other triangle.
It did. There you go. And of course, that was the last year when Nazareth was in operation. Yeah, I don't know, man. I'm hopeful for the future with this iRacing deal, but just thinking of the Technics games for late stage EA games, and then NASCAR Heat got better as time went on, but was still never really that great given modern technology. And then obviously Ignition was just complete disaster. So 20 years since we got a almost universally praised NASCAR game. How do you like that?
I stick with the full on simulators nowadays. I don't do much with the arcade games unless they're from that era, which I'll go back and play those every now and then. But
yeah, I'm gonna have to dust off my PS2 after this. You've sparked a whole bunch of childhood memories for me tonight.
You're welcome. Ace Moneymaker, he'll give you a call.
There you go. All right. Well, before we move on to Xfinity, this conversation came up this week, as it has the last several years. This is, I think, the 4th year now. I think back to when we started Bristol Dirt, that NASCAR's actually had a race on Easter Sunday. That was a tradition for many, many years, that it would be an off weekend across the board for all 3 series, and the Cup Series even longer before that, not racing on Easter Sunday. I remember, growing up, there would maybe be a truck or a nationwide race, on Good Friday or Holy Saturday or part of that weekend, but the Cup Series would always be off. And then Bristol Dirt kind of started this trend back up, where we have had races on Easter Sunday. Brandon, I know that you're a Christian. I share the Christian faith as well, but I want to get your thoughts, because I think it's not just Christians that are divided on this. It's a holiday, and there's not too much other stuff going on. Does it make sense for NASCAR to try to claim Easter in that one sense? Like the NBA has their Christmas Day games, the NFL has Thanksgiving Day games. Does it make sense for NASCAR to have a race on Easter, or would you rather they leave that holiday alone and let the team spend time with their families?
Trying to set my personal convictions aside, I think if you look at the stands on Sunday evening alone at Richmond, I think that should tell you enough that it's not catching on like they would intend for it to. I just don't think people are getting out to go watch pay a Cup race ticket for their family and watch a Cup race on Sunday evening, on Easter Sunday. I don't think they're buying into that, especially. And I think it's more, I might get flagged down for this, but I think it's more geographical than we may realize. Like a place like Richmond, Virginia, I don't think the average family is going out to watch a Cup race at night on Easter Sunday. But I think if you went somewhere like, I don't know, somewhere different in the country, or maybe there's not many churchgoers per se by title, then you might get, anywhere in California, I'd say is a good place to start. you might get some more attendance. But that's just one person's opinion. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I mean, I can see both sides of it, and up here in New England now, I could maybe see New Hampshire being an option if it weren't for the fact that this time of year it's still quite cold up in New England. So I don't know that that would be a date that New Hampshire would be interested in. But I don't know that it's necessarily just a geographical thing either. I think it's important to remember not everybody involved in NASCAR is a Christian, but the reality is I think it makes up the majority of the fan base, and not just the fan base, but drivers and teams as well. And I think there is something to be said for maybe giving them that time to reflect with their families and have a day off and be able to spend some time with them. But I can also see from a business standpoint, if you want to, I mean, well, like what we had this weekend, we had a Formula E race in Japan. We had a rally event going on, and Grid Live wrap up yesterday with our friend Joe was very, very short because the Formula E race, took place on a Saturday. I think maybe even the late stages of Friday night still, depending on when the start time was, for us here in the States, and even on the West Coast. So pre-race took care of that, and then wrap up was very short because there just wasn't much going on. So I could see from a marketing standpoint where NASCAR might want to spend some time to capitalize on that. But to your point, and Joe brought it up here in the chat as well. Maybe it's a Richmond thing as well. The crowd's been down there
definitely a Richmond thing as well
for years. But even Bristol Dirt to an extent. I feel like obviously the days of us filling all the 160,000 seats or whatever for the spring race, I think are long gone. I don't think if we ever get back there, it's not going to be an overnight transition. But I think the dirt certainly was a novelty that helped bring some fans in with the curiosity factor. Like this is going to be something different. And again, was that maybe offset by the fact that, some race fans didn't want to go out on Easter Sunday to attend a NASCAR race? I don't know. I think there's certainly an argument to be held for both sides here. I think as long as NASCAR's having a race on Easter, the debate's going to come back up again every year. But, again, I would probably share your viewpoint. I would lean towards, I would wish that it would be an off weekend for everybody like it was for many, many years. But I can also understand it's a business as well. And I don't know that, necessarily, even if it's the majority of people's religious faiths, I don't know that should necessarily be the driving factor in terms of what we do to create our schedules.
Right. And the places we've tried to do it so far, I think, to Joe's point, have really formed our perspective on it with Bristol and Richmond, places that needed that second date to shine. They needed help. And so they tried to add something special to it. But I think people who, not new fans, I think core fans, for families that have been fans and things like that, I think there's some sort of marketing that's gone on in the past that has convinced the average NASCAR fan that the fall race at Bristol, the night race at Bristol, just is better. And if you're going to buy one of the tickets, you're not going to spend your money. If you're not going to spend your money on both, you're going to buy the fall race. And with Richmond, I think there's been a worse problem with Richmond. I think a lot of, unless you're from the Virginia area, I think you think, if I'm going to spend my money on a NASCAR ticket, Richmond doesn't really go up on the highest of totem poles. And I hate that for Richmond because it has such a wonderful past. I mean, it's a lot of great moments. And it's such a beautiful place at night. And I'm so glad it's back in the nighttime. That place is meant to be under the lights. But it's not, I think there's just something placed in the average NASCAR fan's mind that Richmond is just not the place you're going to get your money's worth. I mean, sometimes you do. There was a lot of great moments last night, but year after year, consistently, they're just not convinced that that's what you're going to get a good product for your money.
Yeah, well, and I think Richmond really had something going for it when it was the last race before the chase back then, and later the playoffs began. I think that gave it a boost, in terms of marketing. Certainly the second date, I think maybe the spring date, you could say, a lot like Bristol maybe suffered in comparison because of that. But, Richmond doesn't have that anymore. Now it's Daytona, and they've tried Indianapolis even one year. I mean, it feels like, that might be a date that they're open to rotating again in the future and not just tying to one track. But again, and this is a whole different discussion. I've always said that, maybe Daytona is the exception. You put the summer race back on July 4th, but other than that, 28 to 32 races at 28 to 32 tracks. Every track gets one date. That would be my philosophy, because I think it's very rare. I mean, you saw it a little bit during the pandemic with, just having to get creative with the schedules and stacking double headers left and right and everything. But before then, and I think, coming out of it now, I think it's a very rare thing outside of NASCAR to have a calendar where you go to the same track twice. So I think that, there are plenty of tracks we could add back to the schedule, and we could do that with shortening the schedule a little bit down from 36, but not going just down to 23 or 24. We can still have, a schedule north of 30 races, but I don't know that, there's certainly a philosophy that no track needs a second date. And I think it would make it, that much more lucrative for the one day that those tracks want to go all in on. Like, hey, this is your one chance a year to see Cup cars on track at your local speedway. Come, make sure you come buy a ticket.
No, I guarantee I could not argue with Dave Moody on why Richmond only needs one Cup date. I'm not prepared to do that, because I don't have any facts to support it. So it would absolutely be owned, and I would have to hang up the phone. But I'm saying they've got to do something to prove why they need this spring date, because there's other. I can't tell you all of them, but there's other dates that I think they're taking this away from that deserve a shot. And I don't know what sort of money is in the market of Richmond and is in the sponsors that go into that Toyota Owners 400 that keep it going year after year. Well, we've got to have the two Richmond dates. That's set in stone. Like, what is it that they have seen that says we've got to have that back, and we can't experiment with something different?
Yeah. Well, and again, to draw it back, I think it was unfortunate timing for Richmond this year that they got the Easter Sunday date. I will say this, though. If they're going to race on Easter Sunday, I'm glad that it is a night race and not a 1 p.m. start. I think if it were
Absolutely.
a 1 p.m. start, the crowd size would be even lower, because people would just be getting out of church and, probably off to, lunch with their families before then. And I think if you start it that late in the day, it gives people time to, worship in the morning and have lunch, and then, get changed and get ready to go out to the racetrack if that's something that they want to do on that particular day. And, certainly plenty of fans did show up, but I think maybe not quite as many as would be good to continue to convince us that Richmond needs this date here in the spring, though. So it'll be interesting to see going forward.
Even the etc. Christians would have trouble on those days. That's Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas.
Yeah. Well, there you go. All right. Let's move on here. Let's get back to our weekend recap, and let's move into the series that we normally cover on this show here on Grid Live Encore, the Xfinity Series. Chandler Smith took the win. Very impressive, like we mentioned, for Toyota. Certainly motivated to perform on a weekend where they're the entitlement sponsor of the races, but you see them up there. Great result for them in the top 4 spots. But I want to focus on Eric Almirola for a second, because the last time Eric Almirola was driving a Joe Gibbs number 20 car in this series, he won a race, but you got to put the air quotes around that, because he got pulled out of a car for Denny Hamlin, whatever it was, I think less than 60 laps into it. So, Brandon, you see a run like this, he won both stages, led the most laps, came up just short to his teammate there. Is Eric Almirola back, for lack of better terms here? Obviously, he's not racing full time anymore, but it's been a while since we've seen him having this much fun and racing up front like this, like he did this weekend here. Well,
you said it there. I'm glad he's having fun, and that excites me that Eric is having fun and he gets to have the Sundays with his family. I've always had a soft spot for Eric Almirola. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's 2018 Daytona 500. Oh yeah, that's exactly what it is. But that aside, I didn't get like that he had to leave the Cup Series to be in Xfinity. Now he's in the revolving door of the Joe Gibbs All-Star seat. Different folks there every now and then. John Hunter Nemechek has been there a lot so far this year, but that's really cool for him to be back. And he did a great job as well. It's just it still surprises me that this is yet another one of those instances where the first and second stage are won by the same person. We've had multiple ones of those already this year for Xfinity, but they never go on to win the race. dominate the 2/3 of it, and then someone else takes it for you.
Yeah, well, if he keeps driving like this, he's going to get a win later this year. And
For sure.
Obviously, he got a win last year at Sonoma driving a Stewart Haas partnered RSS racing car. So, I think like I just mentioned, like you mentioned, Brandon, I think that's been the big thing for Eric Almirola. Scaling back to part-time, racing on Saturdays instead of Sundays, and going out there and just having fun. I think that's something that, again, when you consider SHR's Cup program and the trajectory of that for the last several years, he hasn't had very much of that in the Cup Series. He almost, like you mentioned, had more fun than you can ever dream of winning the Daytona 500. Unfortunately, Austin Dillon had other ideas there on that last lap, but he handled that defeat with he handled that with. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm flirting off just a little bit. Heard just a little bit.
Yeah, well, he handled that, I think, with tremendous class, and I think he gained a lot of fans that day. And then, of course, ultimately went on to win at Talladega later that year, and picked up another win at New Hampshire a couple of years later. But didn't quite find as much success with that team as I think people were expecting him to when he took over for Danica Patrick at the end of the 2017 season. So, for him to come into Xfinity with a team that I think, again, I think a lot of people just kind of assumed that bridge was burned after 2007 and that Milwaukee race, but. It's time heals all wounds, I guess, as they say. He's back with the program now, and both driver and team in a very different place than they were 17 years ago. And great to see Eric having a good run out there. And like we mentioned, a very strong day for Gibbs and Toyota as a whole. Also a very strong day for a driver that you were very excited about, Brandon, getting this opportunity. Bubba Pollard up there in 6th place, working his way from the back at the start of the race up to the front here. And great result for him in his Xfinity debut with this opportunity. How impressed were you by Bubba Pollard this weekend?
That was a great run there, and we expected it, but it's a little too great because it was JRM's best finish of the year. You reminded me, so oh no, they've been having that panic button on for the last year and going into this year. It hasn't stopped for them, unfortunately. And Sam Mayer, bless his heart, he's getting the worst of it. That tire rub, he wanted to keep moving, could not. He was in a position to win the race. Hate that for Sam Mayer, but yeah, Bubba Pollard, he fell back into the pack a few times, able to climb his way back up because this is what he does. It's short track racing. He knows how to manage his tires. He knows how to break in early and to get the most out of your corner exit. And he just knows how to race folks on short tracks. That's just what he does. And he showed it there with a P6 and showed the rest of the junior motorsports drivers how it's done in his one-off. I hope he gets more opportunities to do this. And I'm still glad that Kelly Miller and everyone at JRM is allowing the unseen talent of the regional tracks and the short track scene to have these starts.
Yeah, great for him to take advantage of this opportunity. But like you mentioned, kind of hard to believe that this is JRM's best finish of the year. Of course, the caveat there is that Justin Allgaier probably should have had a win at Phoenix before he lost the tire with, what was it, 4 or 5 laps to go. Yeah, but kind of remarkable stat there. But, guy comes in his debut. And, of course, Bubba Pollard is no rookie in the traditional sense, right? He obviously has a ton of late model experience, very accomplished driver over there. Now, if he were coming in at, let's say a track like Talladega or something, probably a different story, but a short track like Richmond, no surprise to see him running as well as he did. And shades of Josh Berry, maybe he gets an opportunity like that in the years to come. I don't know if he'd ever be interested in going full time, but he certainly sounded interested in not making this just a one and done here. He might want to take another shot at it. So we'll see.
Yeah, maybe even for the Xfinity Series full time. I think that would be a perfect option for him if he wanted to venture outside of the super late models. Yeah, that rookie stripe on the back of Bubba Pollard, it's kind of like seeing it on SVG. It's like, that's silly. He's no rookie at all.
I remember when Bill Elliott came back to run the Road America race, and the rules are if you're driving in a series and a track that you've never driven before, you've got to have that rookie stripe. So they put a rookie stripe on a Hall of Famer's car there, and that was
the Talladega speed record holder with a rookie stripe.
Yeah, that doesn't make a ton of sense there, but the rules are the rules, I guess. I appreciate their consistency. That's something that I wish NASCAR had a little bit more of. So kudos to them on that front, I guess. Let's talk about colleague racing a little bit as well. Certainly not a great day for them on the Cup side of things. I think 29th and 30th is where Ty Dillon and Daniel Hemrick ended up. But the Xfinity Series side here as well, you see AJ Allmendinger down in 14th, SVG 15th. Josh Williams, a decent result for him compared to how he started the year in 12th. But Brandon, I want to ask you this question. Did you ever consider colleague racing to be a top team on the level of, the Cup affiliated Junior Motorsports with Hendrick and, obviously Gibbs and, Childress and teams that run Xfinity programs? Colleague obviously has a couple of Cup charters now. I think their Cup results have not been anywhere near as strong as their Xfinity results from the last several years. But I feel like what you're seeing now, even in Xfinity, it feels like maybe having their resources split between that Cup program and their Xfinity program, it's maybe forced them to take a step back here. Do you think that they've lost their status as one of the top Xfinity teams?
Yeah, I think you're right. There's been a little bit of a lull there. We talked about them a ton last year and the year before that with, AJ Allmendinger's run for the championship 2 years ago, and then had Chandler Smith in their seat doing a fantastic job. Always a conversation starter and weekends. And last year, yeah, it's kind of been sort of a step down, kind of in limbo. And you're right, with the more emphasis into their Cup Series program, that sacrifice has to come from somewhere. It's in the same shop. And so maybe we're seeing sort of a leveling out of both Cup and Xfinity programs. I'm still hopeful for what Shane Van Gisbergen can do here with the 97, although that's with Trackhouse. But it's all kind of, it's still not very clear in my head with how that works with Trackhouse and Colleague. He's kind of moving and grooving with everybody. They're all kind of in a Chevy partnership with each other. It all works out in the paperwork, I know, but sometimes it's a little fuzzy. But sometimes I forget whether to call him a Trackhouse guy or a Colleague. But anyway, they are certainly in a lull here so far in this season. I would like to see them pick up the pace here a little bit.
Yeah, well, certainly a lot of Trackhouse support on the Cup side. I don't know how much. I think some of that certainly translates over to the Xfinity side. Obviously, Trackhouse only has a Cup program at the moment. Justin Marks is racing MotoGP now, for crying out loud. I would not doubt his ambitions, for the future. But, certainly I think Xfinity for sure. You can call that a Colleague entry, and Trackhouse certainly having some influence there. But again, AJ Allmendinger, this is I think his third non-top 10 of the year. It's getting to the point where, in 22, the last time he ran the series full time, he had that many non-top 10s going into the round of 8. So I don't know that we necessarily should have expected a run like that again. I think it was a remarkable, consistent stretch. But again, I just you look at the pace of Josh Williams to start the year, and obviously SVG's certainly a rookie on the ovals. Obviously on the road courses, like you just mentioned, it feels weird to see that rookie stripe on his car. But tracks like this, I think certainly not too surprising to see that. And obviously I think he should be classified as a rookie for those purposes. But again, I feel like there's a spark that Colleague had for the last few years that I feel like has kind of been dimming out the last couple of seasons, and the start to this season in particular. And again, the Cup program is a whole different thing here. I think certainly it doesn't help your chemistry having a rotation of drivers in that 16 car. And I'm happy to see AJ Allmendinger back in Xfinity. I think that's probably the better series for him to be in at this point in his career, because I think that it gives him an opportunity to go out and win more races and have more fun competing for a championship. But their Cup program, I think, has a long way to go still. And I think, I still remember listening to Dale Jr.'s podcast at the end of 21 when it was announced that Daniel Hemrick was going over to Colleague, and he predicted that that the team's performance was going to suffer a little bit because they were buying these 2 Cup charters and their resources might be split. And I wasn't quite sure where he was going with that. I kind of figured we'd take a wait and see approach, but I think 3 years into this, being in the third year rather of this point of a team's history where they've got that Cup program, I think maybe that's starting to catch up with them even on the Xfinity side of things here.
Yeah, only at the end does he understand. It took a few years to see Dale Jr.'s prediction for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been hard to see him suffer like that, but hopefully they'll level out here. I want to say one thing about Shane Van Gisbergen, though. I feel like we haven't seen him. He's got a little bit of the beating and banging again here at Richmond, but I don't think we've seen him fully come out of his shell. Like, he's still, been saying in the past couple of weeks, he's been kind of excited, still not excited to be here, pleasant New Zealander smile, and everything's great, life is great. When we go to Martinsville next weekend, something's got to break on this man. I not that I want him to break, but I want to see him get into NASCAR essentially. Just like, okay, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to contend for a win, and if someone gets in my way, I'm not scared to move him over a little bit, and or if he gets moved, I feel like he's going to be a part of some sort of controversy next weekend, and maybe we'll see him unravel another one of those layers he's got as he gets over here into America. I would like to see one of those.
Yeah, I think it's certainly very likely that we see a welcome to NASCAR moment.
It's like when does it pop? Like when does that finally pop open? Like, okay, I'm sorry, Fox, I'm mad right now. Like, he's not going to have the pleasant demeanor anymore.
Yeah. Well, he got his first taste of it last week at COTA, and I think plenty of opportunities coming up for something similar as well. So we'll have to wait and see. Again, I think it's more likely to happen, and I expect AJ to be a little bit higher, given his history with this team here. Not too surprised that SVG would come in 15th at a Richmond race his first time around. Again, you got to remember he's still learning these ovals and everything, but it's going to be interesting to follow that team's progress as the year goes on, because again, just for whatever reason, I feel like they are a little bit behind here. They're certainly not a bad team or a backmarker team at this point. I think they're still capable of going out, and you saw it at COTA. They, arguably should have had a 1-2 finish in that race, and then we got into overtime and everything fell apart. But, I think looking at where their oval program is right now, a little bit to be desired to start the year. So we'll see if they can turn things around.
You and I both think that AJ Allmendinger going full-time Cup last year was probably the biggest mistake that team has made in a while. It probably hurt them in more ways than they think. Yeah,
and again, I was very surprised that AJ agreed to it, because I just, again, for a guy that has so much energy, when he's in front of the cameras and everything, he got so burnt out when he was doing it with JTG. And again, I think JTG, obviously not a Hendrick or a Gibbs or a Penske or a top team like that, but maybe in a similar situation, trying to find their footing in Cup and figure out their identity, and always striving to improve week in and week out. But I think Colleague was in a similar position. He had some good runs, even had some good runs of the ovals when he was part-time in 22. So I think on paper, the move made sense, but in reality, you're right. It might be catching up to them here in 24.
Yeah. But even at the end of 2022, I was also saying, this success is awesome. We need to go full-time Cup with them. Like, you can't know that going in. So you can't fault them for trying. And of course you have to follow through all through the year, but it turned out to be not the best in hindsight.
Yeah. Well, but again, 8 road courses last year. It was like,
how could you not?
That was a massive what if for me, to see what he could have done. But again, I guess we'll never know. And he's got an opportunity to make up for it this year, being back in the series. But we'll see where things take that team going forward here. Now, one other thing we have to talk about before we close out the show tonight. I think this made Bleacher Report, it made The Score, it made a bunch of Instagram highlight reels. We've seen Hans devices thrown, we've seen gloves thrown, we've seen helmets thrown. I don't know if I've ever seen an entire rear bumper with its tethers ripped off and the driver chucking it at another driver's windshield, but that's exactly what Joey Gase did this weekend to Dawson Cram. Brandon, what are your thoughts on that whole incident there? And something that I can't recall ever seeing anything like that before.
Yeah, that was a bunch of irony right there, because do you know who Joey Gase's sponsor is?
Race Against Crime?
McGruff the Crime Dog, specifically. And if you've ever heard these PSAs before, they've got one of one of the worst voices. We had one on our station a while back, and it was just the laughing joke of the station for a while. We're like, we got to switch it. This is dumb. It's like buying fake helmets. It's like fakes cause real harm. Just you're smart, buy smart. That's basically all they say. So it's like OSHA. I think it's OSHA backed kind of thing. So the fact that that Fox brought it up, the fact he's not wearing gloves and he's picking up a whole piece of sheet metal from his car and yanking it at Dawson Cram. I hope the crime dog did not catch woof of this because that may not go well in the sponsor meeting whenever they have that next.
Yeah, thankfully no animals were harmed in the making of this fight sequence here.
He timed it just right, though. That was an impeccable time.
No, he did. All joking aside, it was an excellent throw. I don't know that we should be endorsing throwing rear bumpers at other cars' windshields here, but this is the thing. And it goes back to the whole Kenza Logano situation in Martinsville that they've been playing for years. Maybe not as much in recent years because Ross Chastain gave them another highlight reel, but again, they outlawed that, but they still continue to promote it. But that's the dichotomy that I've always had is that, I don't know that you can both, suspend Joey Gase or fine Joey Gase or whatever you want to do, come down with any sort of reprimand for it, and then also turn around and use it in your hype videos for the next 10 years. I feel like...
Which they will.
Yeah. It's inevitable that they're going to do that. And if you do that, I would have to say I probably would not want to see a fine or certainly not a suspension for it. Having said that, if they decide that a rear bumper is severe enough that it does warrant a suspension, I certainly don't want to see that clip, after it makes the highlight reel this week. You certainly shouldn't be doing that. I mean, you want to talk about something that gets fans to buy a ticket to Richmond. That's the perfect hype video gold right there, but you could throw in that.
And also, you take a look back at the safety crew. They make no attempt, Ben, to stop this man from throwing this huge piece of metal. They see him getting ready to, the same as Bristol, helmet throwing. We've seen it all the time. But the AMR safety crew, they just kind of accept this is what this guy's going to do. Okay, let him get it out of the system. It's not hurting anybody. At least we don't think it's going to. But the fact that they don't hey buddy, stop. It's kind of more of a Gene Wilder, Willy Wonka approach. Don't stop. No, please. Don't.
Yeah.
They don't really want you to stop. And they're going to put Joey Gase right next to names are made here, the NASCAR Xfinity Series.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's probably the path they're going to go down. I guess we'll know in the next couple of days. I'd be very surprised if, we see, maybe a fine, but I don't know that a suspension is coming his way for that. But again,
I hope
not something that I think necessarily we should be promoting to our young drivers that this is something that you want to be doing too often either. It's certainly, I guess, they say all press is good press. It's cool to see NASCAR on a Bleacher Report, and maybe we'll see more of that, in the next couple of years with a new TV deal and everything. But, it certainly made for a nice highlight reel. But again, you can't get over the irony of race against crime being on that rear bumper that's being launched at another man's windshield there. The irony there is just too good.
Yep.
All right. Well, on that note, let's wrap things up here for the show tonight. Brandon, again, like we mentioned, lighter night here, but got the opportunity to talk about the Cup Series as well. So maybe that opens up your doors a little bit for one shining moment selection here. But what was the one thing that stood out to you from this weekend of Easter racing here at Richmond?
I still have to stick with Xfinity, though, even though we talked about the Cup Series. I can't hype up Bubba Pollard coming to Richmond for 3 to 4 weeks and not making my one shiny moment. That'd be kind of counterintuitive. P6 with JRM gets their best finish of the year. How could you not? Bubba Pollard, he's got many trophies in his closet from different places in super late model world, and comes out there and shows them at Richmond how it's done. He needs some more opportunities, and there's a long list waiting behind him that also need opportunities like that. That's Bubba Pollard, my one shining moment.
And I will also stick an Xfinity for my driver that I want to spotlight. Of course, I talked about him a little bit earlier on tonight, but Eric Almirola, great run for him. And again, hopefully he can get some more opportunities in that Gibbs car this year. I don't know exactly what his schedule looks like again off the top of my head, but certainly he showed that he hasn't forgotten how to drive just because he isn't driving on Sundays anymore. So great to see him have a good run. Also want to give a shout out to NASCAR for being bold enough to go out and start the Richmond race in unknown conditions and putting it in the hands of the drivers and, having the drivers prove that they could handle those unknown conditions and put on a good show for the fans and shortened the delay time between the weather passing through and the start of the race. Again, I don't know if we're ever going to get to the point where we can race in the rain on ovals, but I think, for situations like this, especially after the sun goes down, you don't have the assistance of that to help drive a track. Certainly good to see NASCAR be able to prove that this is a solution that works and can help us in the future. And hopefully the success that we saw this weekend will make them more confident, like I was saying, in terms of being willing to try this again in the future. So that was great to see. That's a one shining moment on my end. And that's been our show for this evening. So thank you all so much for watching this episode of Grid Live Encore and all our great programming. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Just because we're at the 1,000 subscriber milestone now doesn't mean we wouldn't appreciate more members joining this channel and subscribing to see our future streams and videos. So thank you all so much for helping us get there. It was a great week for our entire team. Thank you all again from the bottom of our hearts. It means a lot to all of us. Make sure you follow us on all our social media platforms as well: X/Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitch, LinkedIn, Threads, and like I said, most importantly, right here on YouTube. If you really liked what you saw tonight, you can join these wonderful individuals on Patreon and support us with a monthly donation there. Join Colin, Deshelle, Mark, Robin, David, and Matthew in helping us cover more expenses here at Grid Network and get to the track a little bit more often. That only will continue to improve our coverage for you, the viewers. Or if you'd rather make a one-time donation instead, you can visit the link to buy me a coffee in the description box below. You can buy a coffee for your favorite on-air personality. Any amount will help us continue to grow this motorsports media outlet here at Grid Network. Or like we said, if you're watching on YouTube, we now have the super chats and super thanks enabled as well. Now, taking a look at our upcoming schedule, as always, Grid Tonight will be back this week with Kobe Lambeth, Josh Birch, and Matt White. Women in Motorsports, stay tuned for that as well with myself, Joe Samiego, and Isha Azim. And of course, we'll do it all over again with Grid Live next weekend, pre-race wrap-up, and Encore to follow. Brandon, any final thoughts before we sign off for this evening here?
Yes, we head to the paperclip next weekend in the NASCAR world and tentatively scheduled to join Matthew Owens on the USRN for the Martinsville broadcast. And haven't got to do anything with those guys since last year in July, the truck race at IRP. And that was a lot of fun. So looking forward to coming back with Matthew at another short track and hopefully not fumble on my words and try to keep it stable and get it back to the front stretch for him. That should be a lot of fun.
Cam Waters, welcome to NASCAR Racing. You're making your debut in the Truck Series at Martinsville. How do you feel about that? That is going to be an interesting experience for sure. It is great to see yet another supercar's name come over here, but Cam Waters is certainly more bold than I would be. That is not the series or the track where I would want to necessarily get my feet wet in NASCAR racing. But, if anybody's up to the challenge, I'm sure it's going to be him. Great to see him get an opportunity like that. And hopefully it leads to more things in the future. Brandon, I don't know if you have any thoughts on Cam Waters and that deal this week, but it's great to see.
No, but that's a wild place to get a start. But I trust supercar guys though, just like SVG. I think he's gonna have the intuition of, okay, this is what I need to do to keep the pace. So hopefully they'll have a good run at it.
All right. Well, for Brandon Crossland, I'm Ben Schneider. Thank you all so much for watching. We will see you next week for Martinsville, and stay tuned throughout the weekend for all of our Grid Live coverage. Thank you all again for 1,000 subscribers. It means the world to us. We'll see you next week. So long, everyone.